speaker this afternoon. He and his wife Pamela have two children, Drew being one, and then their daughter Leslie, who recently got married and is living in San Mateo with them now. He preaches for the congregation there at San Mateo and has for several years now. He is the co-director of the English lectures in Cambridge and London, along with speaking on other lectureships. For our members, his father-in-law is someone who is well known here, Noah Hackworth, who has spoken on the lectures here several times in the past. And I was given this information about Johnny, that he recently received the highest award that the Baywood School in San Mateo gives out. It was an honor for him to receive the PTA Honorary Service Award for this year. So he is involved in a lot of different works. But he sent me this PowerPoint presentation of pornography, and well, Johnny, this subject doesn't allow that. No, I'm glad that he wouldn't do that, but we are grateful that he's here, and a subject that needs to be talked about in our society, because so many today don't have any concept of what pornography even is anymore. And so he's going to be speaking on that subject.
It's been an unspoken but bit of curiosity as to how Michael had decided the topics and who would receive those topics. I mean, I'm not really sure how Brad felt about contemporary music and dance, and I think that Michael was thinking that maybe he'd play some contemporary music and dance at the same time. We all think that he sort of hit it right on the nose with David and Immodesty. Who could doubt but that listening to Terry night, day in and day out might drive one to suicide? And who better represents impure speech than Ken Chumley? Now, as to the PowerPoint presentation, I really had intended to take advantage of the vast resource library that was discovered on Terry Hightower's computer, which he says he inadvertently left home. He only brought a box full of Hurley's Introduction to Logic. Something got mixed up, but that's why I don't have my presentation, my disc itself. Again, it's a joy to be here with you, and certainly to see many of you again who are soldiers in the battle for truth and righteousness. We're talking about moral issues, and there could be fewer issues more pressing than the ones we're talking about in this lectureship. I really do appreciate the work that the elders and Michael are doing here. The last year's lectureship, an excellent one, Back to the Bible and the book that was produced, and of course the one that they have for this year also. We've made use of them for our study classes, and we hope that many of you will do the same. I do think that from the impression that I've gotten, that the very fact that we live in California is pornographic. I'm feeling that that's how Michael viewed this. He says, well, you live in the land of pornography, so you should probably take that subject. In the book of Isaiah 55, 8 and 9, my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, saith the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. From the very beginning, the thoughts, the standards, the ideals of God have been not just different from that of man, higher than that of man, but concerning this particular subject, purer than man. That quotation that we use from the book of Isaiah is just one example of how different man is from God when he decides to pursue his own path. Jeremiah 10:23. The deviant nature of man, who has resisted the word of God, who has developed an unwholesome, idolatrous, self-serving, licentious, perverse alternative to the holiness, righteousness, and spirituality that God desires that man possess. That is what we're talking about this afternoon. The subject, pornography. There are some things in some of the subjects that some of you have had this so far and later in the lecture series where there are some things that you can say there are some good things about it and there are some things that aren't good. Brother Jimmy in his lesson that he just presented, the idea there is some stem cell research, there are some things about it that are good. You can find some good in it, the adult stem cells. And of course music, there is good music. But there is absolutely nothing good in pornography. And people, they often try to argue with the idea that you can't define it. We don't know what it is. We don't know what pornography is. And they appeal to the First Amendment. They say we must have freedom of speech. And they try to come up with these definitions. Well, in the lectureship book, I went to the Wikipedia. And it says that pornography is the portrayal of it. Now, this is pretty clear. The portrayal of explicit sexual subject matter for the purpose of sexual excitement and erotic satisfaction. Said it may use any of a variety of media ranging from books, magazines, postcards, photos, sculpture, drawing, painting, animation, sound recording, film, video, and video games. That covers just about everything that one can consume. There are tremendous, enormous problems that are related to pornography, both from the side of the industry and consumer vantage points. That industry has become, as we say, ubiquitous. It is so widespread and pervasive to the extent that many people really probably cannot recognize the psychological damage that it is doing. They have no idea how the tentacles of pornography are making their way to the innards, the very essence of man. And increasingly, people are buying products without even the hint of the deterioration of the moral fabric that results from this. It has ruptured what has already been a fragile societal psyche through a progressively friendly district court system, liberal bias toward media companies by enabling pornographers to operate underneath the general public radar for decades. I remember a few of you mentioning that the very idea of Lynn Parker in a bikini was pornographic. And the use that he had. Now, I love the story. I can tell it because he's not here, so I can get away with it. But you know, when he did that lesson on modesty, and he had a little green bikini, that's just wrong. So he had this little green bikini. Well, he lost that bikini, and I want you to know he bought another one. He couldn't find a green one, but he bought another. And so when we look at the circumstances, community standards, and this is where it comes down to community standards, and they are for us of little value when the scriptures are involved. They are supposed to be the guide for everything. The scriptures are the guide for everything regarding life and godliness. 2 Peter chapter 1 and verse 3. I want to go on to that point because we ought to be able and more willing to stand apart from those standards. We, as members of the body of Christ, to expose them for what they are, the invitations to licentiousness and idolatry. We ought, as members of the body of Christ, to make stands, public stands, on these particular points. Not to get political, but just last week there was a person who made, or is in the process of becoming a part of the presidential race, who just made a public statement. Homosexuality is a sin, and it's a choice. More politicians, where they're not so busy being politicians, will make statements like that. Those are the people that you can support. But today, with the idea of pornography, it tells us that no human standard will ever reflect the high moral code of God. And we needed to appropriate a community standard on face value because we already know that the standard is not built on the scriptures in a way. In other words, we should not let the community dictate to us when we're talking about these types of standards. Now, in 1964, we put in the lectureship book, Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart tried to explain hardcore pornography, or what is obscene, and this is what he said: I shall not today attempt further to define the kind of material I understand to be embraced. I know it when I see it. I think you know it when you see it. Just as with David's lesson earlier on immodesty. People say, well, is this immodesty? Is this too short? If you ask the question, you already know. It's not very difficult to figure out what's immodest. It's when you're trying to circumvent, you're trying to take another route around what the scriptures plainly, clearly lay out for us, that you have the problem. We look at this situation that's taking place right before us with this particular congressman. And he doesn't want to leave, and I'm not interested in all of that. But even in society today, people can recognize when something is explicit, when something is pornographic, and when a person who exposes themselves in that way should no longer be served. Not in the public. We cannot depend on the judgments, proclamations, laws, rulings, declarations of men to establish the codes of conduct that God has already spoken of and put in place through His divine word. Because those definitions may not ever rise to the standard that God has set for us. And since pornography is situated as a community-defined standard, it's hopeless to rely on any man-determined community to implement standards equal to God's standards. In the book of Philippians, chapter 4, verses 8 and 9, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, the things that are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, that if there be any virtue, any praise, think on these things. Things which you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, do. It's too often that we find ourselves, when I say ourselves, use it generally and broadly, members of the Lord's church, to assimilate into the larger society and subsume the dictates of Satan over those of God. People are allowing themselves to assimilate into society, become invisible, where we're supposed to be pilgrims and strangers. as was mentioned earlier, and we'll get to it again with television and some other subjects. Regardless of the rating of a program or a film, the Christian is to have higher standards than those of both the industry or the viewing public. Nowadays, we see that each program and many programs, they have to spell it out for us. We can't understand it through implication. They have to spell it out. They have to be explicit. And I mentioned before this fellow in San Francisco. He said, "Well, what's it like in the San Francisco area?" Of course, we always joke about it a little bit. Of course, it is without question the most beautiful. We always know it's the most beautiful place in the world. And you're jealous. But it is a place that's also liberal, more liberal than you can imagine. And as I said before, and I'll say once again, and people say, "Well, you have a left-wing extremist out there, Nancy Pelosi." And I say, "You just don't know. Nancy Pelosi is a conservative in San Francisco. You have no idea." Point that we put in the book titled, "Well, it sells and now coming to your cell phone." This idea of pornography. The idea of if it sells, is that all that matters? Is that the only thing that's important? That money is transferred from one hand to the next. In the book of Matthew chapter 5 verses 27 through 29, and Jesus talking about not committing adultery, and he says that if you look on a woman and lust after her, you have committed adultery already. And if thy right eye offend thee, pluck it out, cast it from thee. But what's happening and what's available on the cell phones these days? You can get pornography right on your cell phone. There are a lot of places that they don't advertise it so much, but they make it understood that if you can have certain types of technology, flash technology, that's what they need in order to push pornography over onto your mobile devices. And they said that it's been said now, people are traveling, commuting on trains and subways. That's what they're looking at. That's what they're downloading. And in the music industry today, it was mentioned, I'm not really sure how much Lady Gaga Brad has on his iPod. But these are really newfound pornographers. Lady Gaga, Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera, all of these in their music videos, where they have little or nothing on. And Lady Gaga, she is nearly the most blasphemous person you can ever imagine. A recent music video supposedly has religious overtones where she chooses Judas. And kids are seeing this and watching this, and even they, as was mentioned earlier, they don't even have a clue of how this is influencing them. All of this created for the purpose of erotic sensation, tight-fitting, or barely clothed persons, arousing desires. The whole history of Hollywood, as a matter of fact, most of the pornography industry is located in California, in Southern California, or out in southeastern part near the desert areas. We look at the passage from Matthew, and it addresses a number of issues, but one thing that it offers for the discussion is lust. The word means to long for, and in its context, it means to long for unlawfully. And that is one of the primary purposes of pornography. Its ultimate purpose is to create an unhealthy and unlawful desire for that which is not one's own. It's a filthy, dirty industry. And it is infecting the nation. Appears to the hidden desires of people. And it's interesting that they find on so many of these politicians, you find that the politicians, and they're keeping an eye on this. They're keeping an eye on this. The people who are downloading this type of thing, they don't understand the psychological impairment that these things cause. You know, that Congressman, Weiner. So now he's going into therapy. That's a cheap way of admitting that he has a problem that's deeper than anyone ever knew. Most of these kinds of problems, at least most of the people who are proficient in understanding it and who do research on it, say these kinds of problems are the hardest ones to root out. And when you think of the number of movie stars and celebrities and all these people, years ago was a program called the X-Files. Science fiction program, they're looking for aliens. Well, the star of the X-Files, he had to go into one of these therapeutic centers because he said he was hooked on pornography. He couldn't get up and go to work anymore. He couldn't do anything else in his life because that's all he could do was look at pornography. It's like crack cocaine. It's like heroin. First John 2:15 through 17. Love not the world, neither the things that are in the world. If any man love the world, the love of the Father is not in him. This is worldliness at its worst. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. And what does it say? Is not of the Father, but is of the world. I wasn't sure whether I was going to mention, because I knew Michael and some others of you might think this was a plug for Apple computers, but I'm not. But one of the things that Apple has done is not allow flash technology in their mobile devices. So that you're not supposed to be able, I guess there are different ways around it, but to prevent these things from being a part of the experience of that particular computer company. Not only that, but they've gone to pains to remove pornographic applications or ones that lead to pornographic sites from their application store. Now, this is not to say that they're a holy company by any means. But at least some people out there understand, for whatever reasons, and their reasons may be purely to be different from the Windows public machines for all I care. But the idea is somebody recognizes that they can do something about this. And one of the problems that they had recently was with this little thing it's called FaceTime. And with FaceTime, you can, and Michael has it. With FaceTime, you can be up there, you can talk to another person on your phone, and you can see them, and they can see you. And they found out that a lot of the stars in the pornographic industry were trying to use it, so that they could just deliver it right there to you on your phone, live and in person. Pornography right there. See, this is where I was going to show those videos and stuff from Terry's computer. Pornography has become our cultural self-portrait. In 2009, there was a press release from American Airlines that said they would begin to block pornography on its internet service during flights. Now imagine that. You're on an airline and they provide wireless service. And you figure if you go online on a plane, and Delta has of course also, you go online, you can bring up anything you want to. You have your computer, you bring something up on your computer. They say, well, we've had a problem, we've had some complaints. And so now we're going to start blocking. Now imagine how people felt who were so immersed into this type of disgusting and filthy content. They were all upset. They couldn't get their pornography while they were flying from one city to the next, from one side of the country to the other. So American Airlines said that they were going to block it during their flights. Good for them. I just imagine what kind of person would be so callous that they didn't even care. They didn't care that you, sitting next to them, were being violated. Nothing you can do about it unless you're going to put those, patches over your eyes or move to another seat. But they're so callous that they don't even care that you're watching this right next to them. That they're watching this right next to you. And they don't care because if you have a computer screen up, who knows how many children might be sitting behind them. But this is what pornography does. And according to some recent data, pornography on the internet says every second. Just think about this. Every second there are nearly 30,000 viewers viewing pornography on the internet. Every second. 30,000. Every 39 minutes, a new pornographic video is uploaded. Now this is just to give us an idea of the extent of the pornography industry. Revenues larger than many of the largest computer tech companies combined. I know Saturday night, I think Dub asked, what if so-and-so were doing this? What if so-and-so were doing that? Well, let's look at the figures and try to imagine if this is in the realm of if we can even grasp this. It said pornography revenues in the United States exceed the combined revenues of ABC, CBS, and NBC. More than 12% of the number of websites in the world are dedicated to pornography. 25% of search, over 25% of every search done on the internet is for pornography. 1 out of 4. And tonight, if we were to say every fourth person raise your hand, and then you see exactly how much this is. We just give out a figure 25%. 1 out of every 4 is requesting a pornographic site. And over 35% of internet downloads, not iTunes. You think that everybody's downloading iTunes. No. Over 35% of internet downloads is pornography. So once again, that's 1 out of 3. Look at a row. 3 people. 1 out of 3 is downloading pornography. Not news, not opera, not children's cartoons. Not 1 out of 3 is internet pornography. And 89%, actually now it's 92% of the pornography web pages on the whole internet are located in the United States. 90%. In some ways, is it any wonder that people are disgusted with our culture? In some ways, is it any wonder that people think that being influenced by America might be a bad? If you look at it from that standpoint, 90% of the pornography in the world is being exported by us. We're talking about the psychological signs of dependence. And the treatments that are utilized are similar to those that are utilized for crack cocaine. It's a problem that does not just go away. And the only sector of pornographic indulgence that has the slightest degree of intolerance is child pornography. That's the only area of pornography that law enforcement is concerned with. Anything else, adult content. Anything else, consenting adults. Anything else, no consideration or concern whatsoever for how it might affect people, for what it does to people, for the way that it is disturbing people. And it goes into some of the subjects that were discussed earlier, the idea of misogyny, the idea of the things that you see in these rap videos and rock videos, and maybe some of the country videos, I don't know. We have no way of gauging how large a problem this is and could be even in the church. Now, we don't want to think about it from that standpoint, but those who are elders, certainly all of us have to be concerned about that as a possibility and how to make sure that that's not something that we're having to deal with. To a lot of people in this country, it's just another form of entertainment. It really doesn't have, it's just like people say, it doesn't matter, it doesn't bother me a lot. They say that with social drinking. A little bit of wine here, a little bit of beer here, a little bit of bourbon here, a little bit of this here, a little bit of that, and the next thing you know, sitting at a bar. Same thing with marijuana. You start out with a little bit of marijuana and you end up in heroin. And young people begin to look at these television programs, or adults, it really doesn't matter. Looking at television programs, and you see people and they're having fewer and fewer clothes on, less and less on. Next thing you know, they say, well, that's not so bad. On television, it's rated G. And the children are watching it, and now it used to be that a few years ago, from 8 o'clock on, it was a little bit older, but nowadays they have it where television is on all the time. You can find any kind of content possibly. You have you have Netflix and all these other things providing video streams into the home. Parents need to know what their children are watching. And the way it sounds, children need to know what their parents are watching. People say, well, it's a private matter. And it doesn't really affect anyone else. I'm watching it in my own little cubby. I'm watching it in the privacy of my home. It doesn't affect me in any way. Put that next to Philippians 4. Think on these things. How can a mind that is becoming infested with, a mind that is becoming even more and more clouded by judgment, that is being ruled by licentiousness and salacious materials such as that, and all types of vulgarity and misogyny, how can that not affect you if you're watching it? I think it was Brother Brad says, you are what you eat. You are what you hear, what you listen to, and you are what you watch. Oh, that's not me. It's like that congressman. I come back to him. Well, what was the first thing he said? I don't know anything about it. It wasn't me. Oh, no, he didn't say what. He said, I didn't put it up there. It wasn't me. I don't know who it is. I was hacked. And bit by bit, he came to admit that yes, this is in fact him. He did in fact send it. And even recently, yes, he was an older married man in contact through Twitter with some 17-year-old girl. And I don't think, I'm just not knowing the man, I don't think years ago that he was necessarily maybe a bad person, but somehow he got himself involved in this whole content, inappropriate content, and it began to sink its teeth into him and take over. And that's what pornography does. It's like the scripture says, a little leaven leaveneth the whole lump. And if we are to keep our minds pure so that we can do the work of the Lord, so that other people may have the opportunity to hear the gospel, we're going to have to not only make sure that we don't have any of that content in our minds, but that also we stand and speak out against it. And children need to understand, as was mentioned earlier, and I think it was David, though I hate to have to ever give David credit, because then he turns around and gives you a proud look. But as David said, when you start out, you teach the children what they should and should not do, what they should and should not wear. And even Brad, you let children know from a very early age. And on the way back, Brother Chumley, he was telling us about how a young girl, I think she was 3 years old, he was visiting, and he was sitting out in the den or living room, and she was about to come out, and she saw someone was there. She ran back in and made sure she was fully covered before she came out. See, people learn things at a very early age. And when we are trying to influence for good, for righteousness, for the things of the Lord, these are the kinds of things that we have to make sure that they understand. This can cause damage, psychological damage. It begins to loosen the person up spiritually. It begins to compromise the principles that are set forth in the gospel. It is an evil. And one thing that we want to point out, going here into closing, one thing we want to point out as we close so that there is not any missing of the primary point here, pornography is sin. It is sinful to produce it, to participate in it, to send it, receive it, view it, condone it, or to in any way approach it as less than sin. Pure and simple. It violates the Scriptures. I will set no wicked thing before my eyes. Psalms 101:3.